Cool. So thank you all for coming today. And we will start with this study, which I found very interesting on the impact of belief rigidity in ongoing conflict and how we might help move towards peace. And so we looked at, or in this study, they looked at what the contributing factors to belief rigidity are, especially in regards to intangible and transcendent beliefs, so religious beliefs specifically, and how might we break down this barrier in order to potentially help lessen or resolve ongoing conflict. And so what they measured, they had three studies as part of this research, and they evaluated participants' fusion with the religious community and their perceived threat about their beliefs. And then they tested whether participants would respond to scientific questions with supernatural responses. And that was kind of their study one. That was the focus. Like, will these participants respond and with supernatural answers to these scientific questions? And then study two, again, evaluated fusion in and with the religious community and perceived threat to one's beliefs, but also included how central the belief was to the religion. And so the primary purpose of this study was to examine the perceived understanding and how much fusion and threat play a role in strong belief rigidity. And then the third study was similar to study two, but these participants were put into a hypothetical situation that threatened their democracy, and they responded to measures as if they were in that situation. And the factors that were evaluated here were fusion with the religious community, perceived threat to one's beliefs, and then also the sacredness of those beliefs. And again, the purpose was to further examine the perceived understanding and belief rigidity. And so what this found was that there's a very strong relationship between fusion, threat, and sacredness as indicators of high belief rigidity. But the sacredness factor has the ability to flip the switch on this and potentially reduce the belief rigidity. So if you have lower sacredness, but still high fusion and high threat, there's a greater potential for sacredness to allow the belief rigidity to lessen. And so how Natalie described this here, in other words, when a community has such a strong focus on sacredness of beliefs, one never really stops to contemplate it, and rather only acts on high threat and high fusion. And so the likelihood that one would go to great lengths, even dire cause violence in support of these beliefs is higher. And so relating this back to peace building and our work in terms of workplace conflicts, encouraging clients to understand themselves, beliefs, or perceptions about the conflict and how they might be able to reconcile can be a helpful part of this process. And as a practitioner, finding ways to help clients do this is critical, and they need to be individualized per person. So I found this really interesting, the element of sacredness along with fusion and threats as contributors to higher belief rigidity, and I'm interested to hear what you all think of it as well.
Super interesting topic, right? The how belief rigidity impacts conflict. That's so core to conflict. I'm wondering, just to clarify. So when the fusion with the belief system was high, but the sacredness was low, they were more flexible. Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was, let's see. So it may still be that high sacredness would result in violence, but when this is low, it has the potential to prevent it. So, I think it was found that high sacredness plus fusion plus threat creates a stronger belief rigidity than just high fusion and high threat. And so when you take out the sacredness element of it, there's a bigger chance that it could reduce the conflict.
Why might that be?
I wonder if it's just I don't know. I didn't say here specifically, but I would say maybe it's just due to more ownership and more embodiment of the belief. If you believe rather than just being something like a political cause, like you are like, I don't know, any political cause, I guess, in general, about like the economy or whatever. While you might have high fusion with that belief, and if that belief is threatened, you might feel more prone to conflict. I wonder if sacredness being this element of coming from a greater source of power, or a more divine element, I wonder if that contributes to that in that way.
Yeah,
It's just
that's the question is what, how, I mean, are they defining, there's, I guess, different ways of defining sacredness, but I think if you define sacredness as something which has deeper meaning, and that meaning can't really be altered by scientific, any kind of facts or anything. It just like has an intrinsic meaning that can't be altered. That if that's how we're defining sacredness, then that makes sense, because it's like no amount of facts or science or anything that could disconfirm the belief will affect it, because it's sacred.
right.
It's unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
Did the study show anything? Maybe could you just go back to the first where it showed like the methods, those 3 steps or whatnot? Of the studies, yeah. Were they? I'm curious if they did test like those that, like to prove this. I'm wondering if they also looked at how one's sacredness to a particular belief might cause, like, I'm thinking in the workplace, right? But if someone else's work, like a colleague, does not share that same sacredness to this belief, if that would cause conflict, just because one might, like the study one where it tested whether participants would respond to, scientific questions with supernatural responses. If a response was so embedded in their belief, would that then cause conflict with someone who, in the same office or whatnot, that doesn't share that same belief?
I would think so, because that to me seems like a potential for a threat perception, right? It's like if I have a belief that's very sacred to me, someone comes to me and doesn't have that same sacredness and sort of challenges the belief, it feels almost like a threat to something that I feel sacred or used with.
Yeah, or even the other way around, where that person who doesn't not that they're threatening the other person's belief, but they almost feel threatened because of that person's very intense sacredness. Right? I mean,
the commitment to a belief that's inflexible and unable to be changed in some way, that could feel threatening. Well, I think we're almost talking about, like, I don't know if this is what the study was getting at, but but sometimes when I hear sacred, it kind of reminds me of this idea of dogma, of just like when someone becomes dogmatic about something, where it's basically there's no flexibility in the belief and it's unfalsifiable. It doesn't really matter about new information or information that might disconfirm the belief. If you're committed and fused, essentially, I don't know how they're using fusion here, but like identity fusion is something that you're sort of embedded at a core identity level. It could feel very threatening to try to converse in a conflict with someone who is inflexible because of the particular dogma they hold on.
Yeah, I was able to find out. I have the study here. Was also able to kind of narrow down what their concept of sacredness was, and they explain that they align it as sacred values specifically, and sacred values are those intuited with having an intrinsic value that is inappropriate for the assignment of economic or material value and considered taboo to evaluate on such a scale. And so they give an example that democracy is a value that many people would not trade for anything in monetary exchange, so that would be a sacred value. So but it doesn't necessarily have to limit to something with God or gods. There's no limit to the values that could be considered a commonplace sacred value, but they can originate from values once considered commonplace, like the perception of land as holy, or yeah, and commitment to sacred values can increase. They say that it can increase willingness to take extreme action.
Sure.
So,
well, that's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, because then it's like, if that's how you're defining sacredness, which I think is a pretty good way of defining it, there is no trade-off. There isn't that's possible. There is no potential win-win. It's only win-lose. If you threaten any part of the sacred value, I'm not willing to trade it for anything.
Right.
Right. And so then it becomes either my way or the highway. My way, it's either I win or I lose, and that's it.
Right.
I mean, and that brings us back to this, the concept of transformation versus resolution, right? I mean, so we clearly can't resolve a conflict when something as intense as sacredness is involved. However, we could, like, and I think that's what you have as like the key takeaways, or you know, for consultants, is basically having coaching individuals to be more aware of themselves and what their beliefs are, and also maybe by doing that there could be a little bit of more openness and tolerance for others.
Yeah, like the expanding. Well, like, you know, so Lederach's book on moral imagination is a great, you know, example of this. It's like expanding the moral imagination, expanding this idea of what a threat or a threat to a sacred value would be. Maybe there's something that's going on that feels initially like a threat, and then we can, over time, in a transformational process, mitigate the perception of that threat. Like, just because these people over here believe X, or just because this person wants to do this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's threatening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that, and helping to transform their recognition that they have some shared values, and that actually the other person isn't really threatening those values.
It's usually, I imagine it's usually in those beliefs and those sacred values that are very exclusive of, you know, it's not like, yeah, I think, I imagine, because I think of like specifically religious beliefs, like you have within like different sects of Christianity, of it being, you know, you have this it's one of the only major world religions that is exclusivist, that you like, that a lot of more theologically conservative Christians believe that, you know, the only way to get to God is through the Christian,
Sure.
this specific Christian lens. And so the sacredness of that value is, you know, anything that comes up against that in any way, whether it's in the same group, like a Christian that believes in maybe more progressive theological values, or whether it's somebody from a different religion, they're just automatically gonna, it's gonna be perceived, I imagine, as high threat. And so I think that sometimes that process of, especially when it comes to religious values, but I imagine it could be potentially different with other sacred values, but that process can take a long time.
A lot of stuff could be looked at as, like, you know, religious, you know, even that things that don't have to do with God can be looked at as religious. I mean, politics at this point, for a lot of people, has become religious. You know, it's just dogmatic. It's just, you know, this is the only way to be, and anybody that doesn't believe this is just purely wrong on a moral and ethical level.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I like these studies of belief systems. I think it's so key to what we do.
Yeah.
It's hard, man. It's hard when you start believing something and you're like, I know the truth. It's really hard to, like, let yourself to even contemplate the fact that I might be wrong. It's freaking hard.
Yeah.
Really hard. I hate it. I hate feeling like, was I wrong? You know?
It's hard to incorporate into your
all the time.
belief. Yeah, incorporating into your belief that maybe leaving room for error, or just
Yeah.
even just the possibility that maybe that's not the only, like there could be multiple truths here that, you know.
Yeah. Maybe not even that I'm wrong. It's just that, could they also be right? You know?
Absolutely. And I think that's like what is so important about the work that we do, is trying to, you know, help or transform, you know, other people's mentality that there's multiple truths. There's just what is true to you is not necessarily true to me. And
But I
that's
want to be right, Sarah. I want to be right.
and you are, you know, like it's not about truth is not about right or wrong. It's
Yeah.
your perception. So
Yeah.
your truth is right. My truth is also right, you know?
Yeah. That's the tough thing to wrap your mind around, is like, how could we both be right when they don't, the two rights don't seem to align, you know? But yeah, no, that's true. That's, if we can help ourselves and other people get to that place of expansion where like we can all be right and all have different truths and it's all okay, that's a good place to be. That's beyond the rigidity of the beliefs.
Yes.
Good.